here with my friend Kyle Buller, one of the founders of Psychedelics today. Hey, Kyle, thanks for being with us.
Thanks for joining. Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
So I just got off my own podcast.
The brain after a while, right? Yeah. So a lot of people know who you are and maybe have or have not heard your backstory. But can you tell people a little bit about, what you do, what you offer now, what you're up to? But you're a really big power player here in the psychedelic space, or whatever we're supposed to be calling it these days. Tell
Psychedelic
people,
Renaissance.
I know, the big renaissance, the revolution. Tell people what it is that you're up to.
Sure, yeah, thank you. So for those that don't know me, my name is Kyle Buller. I'm one of the co-founders and the director of education the director of training and clinical education at Psychedelics Today. So at Psychedelics Today, we're a media and education platform. We have a podcast. Our 5-year birthday, I think, is tomorrow on the 13th.
Yeah, there's a party.
So there's a party. Woo! So we've been doing this for a while. And also in our education, we're training clinicians, therapists, coaches, kind of people in the wellness sector that really want to get a head start in understanding the psychedelic landscape, how to get involved a little bit more, understanding, the research, how to navigate this space. So on one hand, managing and running Psychedelics Today and, really kind of directing the education over there. And then other part-time work that I do. I'm a somatic and transpersonal therapist here in New Jersey, a licensed associate counselor. And so I'm just working under supervision at the time. And I think also getting slowly entering into the ketamine-assisted therapy space. Everything got put on pause with COVID. So now that it's starting to go back into the office, I'll be stepping into that work some more. So I'm excited for that.
Wow. Let's hear a little bit. I'm just curious about that. Did you go through a training program? I mean, you actually have your own training programs.
I went to the KRIA conference in 2019, which is a week-long conference on ketamine. That's directed by Dr. Raquel Bennett. Wonderful, wonderful conference. And I also went through a couple parts of the Polaris Insight training, and that's ketamine specific, and they're doing some really wonderful work over there. I really love the instructors at Polaris. So even though I have my own, education, thing that I'm doing, it's really important to learn from other experts in the field. So definitely getting my training there as well.
And I'm curious, because I've now heard about people doing this ketamine therapy, even with COVID, doing it remotely. Is this something that people are going to come to you for? And can you speak to this idea? I don't know if this is even true. I've just been hearing it around that there are, whoever it is, doctors or licensed practitioners who are giving out ketamine for use at home with your own therapy or a separate therapist. Is this true?
Yeah, it depends on the prescriber and how they're operating. So there are some places that are doing at-home ketamine. They're doing remote ketamine sessions. I have some mixed feelings about that. But I know when COVID first happened, Dr. Raquel Bennett from the KRIA Institute did kind of put out a little statement about maybe transitioning to at home, when the pandemic was really locking down. And, should you be doing in person during the pandemic? Probably not. So I think a lot of folks did make that transition to online. And again, it's at the discretion of the prescriber and the therapist. And, even before the pandemic, there were some prescribers, once they already had established some rapport with the clients, maybe they would do take-home lozenges. And so it has been going on even before the pandemic, but then I think it definitely intensified. But I haven't stepped into that space. I feel like the in-person work is very important. And even just being kind of somatically oriented and really trying to work with the body, all the body language, even some of those techniques, I can convert it online, but there is something about being in person to do some of this deep, powerful work. So I've kind of put a pause on it. And like I said, I was hoping to get more involved, and then the pandemic got on pause. And then, I probably could have stepped into the online stuff a little bit more, but I was that's not how I want to operate right now. Because for those that know, and maybe that don't know, I have training in breathwork too. and that's other stuff that I do breathwork workshops, and I'm associated with Dream Shadow. That's my teacher's organization, and helping out with their training as well. And that's something we haven't converted online. And I know lots of people do online breathwork, and I have done online breathwork here and there with clients or groups that I've worked with and I have rapport with. But yeah, it was just something I didn't really transition into, of offering just public breathwork workshops, just because of the intensity of it. I want to make sure I can really hold that space, and make sure people feel safe going into really cathartic spaces. And sometimes the home environment is great, they feel safe. Other times home environments might not actually be the best place to be doing some of this work. So
I agree. Yeah. Well, no, it's just so interesting to see how things are changing, and, these new ideas. Like, I was personally a little shocked that people were being given ketamine to just do at home and then do maybe a video therapy session. But I guess if it works, if you're depressed, if this is the last resort, if, we're all in lockdown, it is, we're all trying to do the best we can. And there's a lot of people suffering from a lot of mental health issues, and people need help. I mean, I'm sure you've seen this. Even I've noticed an uptick of people just kind of feeling this desperation of like, where can I find someone? Accessibility is a whole nother, story.
Yeah.
Well, really quickly, because you do so much. I know somatic therapy, the breath work, psychedelics today. Can you tell people like what led you down this path? How did you become like one of the original psychedelic entrepreneurs in the kind of new revolution?
Great question. It really started, I guess, like at a young age. In my teenage years, I was introduced to a book called Snowboarding to Nirvana. I got introduced to meditation through there. And then a year later, almost exactly a year later, I kind of joke, like I snowboarded to Nirvana to some degree. So I got in a really bad snowboarding accident when I was 16, ended up rupturing my spleen. And for those that want the more in-depth story, I could share a podcast that I did with Hallie Rose, where I go into a lot of detail about that, and I think I did a pretty good job recapping that. So if you want the long thing, maybe Beth can put it in the show notes, and you can take a listen to that episode. But that near-death experience really just like opened me up to a new way of, I guess, seeing the world. And to some degree, it was probably the most psychedelic experience I've had. I think, psychedelics show us what maybe confrontations with death and life. And I mean, when you're in that, I was having massive internal bleeding. The doctor said if I came in 5 or 10 minutes later, I would have been dead on arrival. So I had, a pretty mystical experience. I felt like I was going home. I heard a voice telling me I was going home. I was going back to the stars. And it just, after having that experience, coming back to the mundane was like, what the hell am I doing here? And it was actually really challenging to kind of, I guess, return to the mundane as a teenager. Teenage years, 16, people are like worried about experimenting, substances and sex. And I'm just, sitting there going, what the hell just happened? What are we doing here as human beings? And, just having a pretty deep existential crisis. And that existential crisis made me pretty depressed, a lot of kind of suicidal thinking. And the suicidal thinking was really a desire to return to that blissful state of going home. It was like there was a part of me that was yearning to go back there. And I think the folks that have had psychedelic experiences could maybe relate to that feeling of oneness in the psychedelic experience. You want to go back there. It feels like the cosmic womb. That's how it felt when I was dying. So I had a psilocybin experience when I was, I think, 19 or 18. And it helped me kind of recontextualize kind of the psycho-spiritual trauma that I went through. It helped provide maybe some answers to that experience, because that near-death experience just left me with so many questions, and I really didn't know what to do with it. I didn't know how to navigate it. So these experiences just opened me up, and I just became so fascinated that I couldn't ignore it. Like anytime I tried to move away from exploring these experiences, something would pull me back in. Before I got really involved, I went out to Colorado when I was 21. And I wanted to move out there to go to school to be a ski bum. Like I wanted to go to a school that had mountain operations. I just wanted to work and play on the mountain. But something just kept nagging me. It's like you need to like explore, consciousness. You need to explore psychedelics. And really it was just me trying to figure out my own process with death. And so that led me to a degree in transpersonal psychology. And I remember just telling everybody what I was interested in back then, and I was going to go to school for transpersonal psychology to study psychedelics. I mean, everybody probably thought like I was nuts, they're like, there's no career in that. What are you doing? Like, what type of job are you going to get with a transpersonal psychology degree? I was dedicated and motivated because it was my passion to really dig into my own process. It had nothing to do with, this is going to be like a huge field. I had some sort of inclination that, the research was happening. I was following maps at that point, but it was really just inspired by me trying to figure out my own process there. So I went to school for transpersonal psychology and really just wrote all my papers on psychedelics when I could. I just dug into all the research that was happening. Came across two breathwork teachers, Lenny and Elizabeth Gibson. They were colleagues and students of Stan Grof, one of the developers, along with his wife, Christina, of Holotropic breathwork. And just really, it was just a really unique experience to be surrounded by so many different mentors and teachers kind of in this transpersonal landscape. And so, that was really kind of like my entry point in. And really thankful for it as well.
Yeah. I'm curious, you said something about exploring your inner process and yourself. I'm curious, have you found what it was that you were looking for?
No, I don't think we ever do. It's a process that just continues to unfold.
Layers and layers
and
and
layers
layers.
And layers. Oh, I got it figured out. And then, more stuff emerges and you go, oh, okay.
Especially the last couple of years, right?
Yeah.
Well, this is interesting. So then, what gave you the insight to start Psychedelics today? I know along with Joe, I don't even know that story of how you two began it together, but I know it was probably kind of taboo back then. It's only become maybe not taboo in the last, year. But what was it like starting up a whole, media and education platform, especially back then? I mean, there's still so many people who want to get into psychedelics who are scared to, even tell people they work with psychedelics.
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely scary. But, I think having that near-death experience at a young age and trying to convey that to people was very taboo. Just talking about like the mystical experience and, I would get odd looks from people. So I guess I got kind of used to getting the odd looks of maybe I'm just a weirdo at this point. But I think also like going to a school where I was able to really explore these like ideas and kind of push the edge, I think gave me a little bit of the confidence to be open about my experiences. So before Psychedelics Today got started, I started up a little group called Setting Sun Wellness when I was living in Burlington with a couple friends. And that was really a space to offer breathwork workshops. And I also, in some of the original texts talked about plant medicines and psychedelics and the power of holotropic states of consciousness. So, I mean, a big proponent of a lot of my work was the work of Stan Grof and just the healing potential. And so I think that was the thing that I really focus on is not specifically psychedelics, but the healing potential of holotropic states of consciousness. And that could be through breath work. It could be through you look throughout different traditional cultures with different rites of passages. I mean, there's so many different ways to foster these types of states, and psychedelics are just one of them as well. So the way that Psychedelics Today actually got started was Joe and I come from the same breathwork teachers. I was living in Vermont and he was living in Colorado. Our teachers are based in Vermont. And I remember Elizabeth just kept saying, have you ever connected with Joe Moore? And I was like, I don't think so. I hear you guys keep talking about him. So it was kind of like a push to just connect. They're like, you guys just have similar interests. You're both into snowboarding. You're both interested in psychedelics and breath work. And so we ended up hopping on some phone calls to just chat and get to know each other. The original conversations were actually oriented towards a master's program at the school that I went to, Burlington College. We were trying to create, there was a self-study transpersonal master's program, but with our teachers, like I was helping to teach some psychedelic related classes there, and we were trying to create a psychedelic studies program under this transpersonal master's program and have breathwork training part of it. And so Joe and I were talking, hey, you know, does this sound like a good degree to go into? And just kind of exploring that. And I don't know, the conversations just started to shape. We were talking about having like some of the audio from our teachers' lectures and really just wanting to create an archive for our teachers' lectures for us. You know, we're like, you know, we have all this material and we want to just, you know, really just have a place for it. And then that turned into, well, Joe already had some podcasts. He had two podcasts in the past, or maybe three, so he already had the technology and knew how to do it. And he's like, well, how about we like, you know, just start interviewing people in the psychedelic space and you know, bring in the work of Stan Grof and holotropic breathwork. And that was something that we observed, I think, in the some of the early conferences when the research was really taking off. We didn't hear too much about some of Stan's work or breath work. And so that became one of our missions, was how do we introduce the work of Stan Grof and holotropic breath work back into the psychedelic conversation in the psychedelic research world. And so, yeah, that was a mission of ours. And then, you know, I had some connections in the psychedelic world by going to conferences at that point. I was like, well, I think I know some folks that we can interview. And it just kind of started snowballing from there. One, you know, just people opening up and being, yeah, we'll do an interview. And at that point, it felt like a very kind of small community. I mean, it still is a small community. It's definitely grown over the years. But yeah, I think like when I went to the MAPS conference in 2013, I think there was around like maybe 600 or so people there. And then in 2017, it grew to like 12 or 1,300 people. So it definitely, you know, grew exponentially. And who knows, when conferences go back, yeah, I wonder what the attendance is going to be like at some of these conferences. So yeah, it's a little bit of the backstory about like how Psychedelics Today got started.
Now, this is so interesting. Thank you so much for sharing. Now, I'm curious, you know, besides the experience you had, you know, what in your own experience of working with psychedelics and the near-death experience and the breath work really has caused you to make this, you know, your living? Because you also work with clients. You also, I know you used to, I'm not sure if you still are doing breathwork workshops. You know, you guys have a lot of education for clinicians, for non-clinicians. You know, what was it that made you inspired to make this a business? Like, you could have just gone and been a therapist, you know, like, or just, you know, even breath work, like, okay, just work with people one-on-one, you know?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, when I started this project with Joe in 2016, I just started my grad school. So I wasn't a therapist yet. And you're right. Like I was working at a residential home for people with early episode psychosis. And, you know, I think it was just a series of events that happened. You know, maybe here comes a little bit of my woo and maybe gets discredited a bit. But, you know, we'll talk about astrology. During my Saturn return, this is when all this stuff started happening. So, like, I started grad school. I started Psychedelics Today. The school that I ended up going to closed up. There was a bunch of deaths that happened around me. And I just said, you know what, I'm going to just go back home for the summer. My life in Burlington kind of fell apart. And I was like, I'm just going to go home, reset, and then like move back to Burlington. And as I just got more, I guess, busy with grad school, and then Psychedelics Today started picking up with interviews and this and that, I was like, you know what, maybe this is a good time to really just focus on this project and see where it goes. So I had the safety net and I had the opportunity to, you know, really focus my energy on these two things. And it wasn't what I wanted. Like, I'm like, oh, I want to move back home. Nobody wants to move back home. But I saw it as like a good opportunity. And knowing a little bit of like that archetypal like language with astrology, I'm like, oh, Saturn return. This is a good time to start to build the foundation for like the next part of your life. And how can I really use this as like an advantage? And so, Yeah, I mean, Joe and I really kind of talked about it. It's like, do we make a business out of it? Is it a passion project? And as things started to take off a little bit more, it started to consume more of my energy.
Yeah.
And then there was a part of going, things are starting to we're starting to get noticed. There's more downloads. Is there a way
More
to
demand.
just, make money? Well, and the other thing is that, as you probably know, there's a lot of work that goes into producing a podcast.
Oh, gosh, yeah.
And, at some point we're like, how do we fund this?
I know.
So the question more was like, could we have some sort of product that that can just help fund the project? We weren't so hooked on, we want to create a huge business. It was more like, we just need to make money to fund this to just, benefit the community down the line. So we ended up creating a course about a year in 2017 called Navigating Psychedelics, Lessons on Self-Care and Integration. And I think it was probably, I'll say maybe one of the first online courses. Yeah. I think definitely one of the first in the space exploring this concept of integration and self-care.
Yeah.
I mean, the conversation was there. I mean, we talk about integration and breathwork. Integration is, I was volunteering with MAPS in 2016 on the integration list. And so this wasn't a new conversation, but there weren't really any resources available. It was just kind of like a budding conversation. And so, we took those podcasting skills and said, well, let's just interview a bunch of people that are doing integration work. And what does this mean? And how can we provide a service to the community? And so that was really how, we started, I guess, the business aspect of saying, like, we want to serve the community. We want to develop these conversations. And just thinking for myself, I'm like, where are the resources? Integration is such a huge part of this process, but I don't really see too much out there about it. And then, also the business side of things, it's like, well, we need to fund, the hosting sites. We need to, just pay for the bills.
Live.
And live. So, I guess that's how it got started. And then as it started to snowball, we're like, okay, I think there's potential here.
People need
like,
it. Yeah.
can we actually make this into a business of some sort, and make it sustainable? Because it's fun, right? I mean, it's like, oh, wow, like this is really, really great to just be a part of. But, it wasn't not like so business oriented where it's like, we want to make millions and millions of dollars. And I mean, we have big visions. I mean, there's definitely a lot of things that we want to do. And I understand money is a really interesting topic within the psychedelic community.
Yes.
And so that's also a challenge. I mean, we definitely got a lot of pushback when we first released that course of, this information should be free. Like, what are you guys doing? And I'm thinking, we just want to be able to pay our hosting services and stuff like that, and
I'm sure their views have changed by now. I'm pretty sure. I mean,
and I wasn't really working at the time, right? Like, I was
Yeah.
focusing on grad school full time, and again, I had this safety net to be able to really do that.
Well, now you guys, one of your biggest courses, I think, is a spin-off of that, right? Like Navigating Psychedelics for Clinicians, I think is what it's
for
mostly
clinicians
called.
and therapists.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so when we first launched the lessons on self-care and integration, we didn't really have a target audience. It was it's for everybody. Clinicians and therapists can show up, or maybe you're somebody that went to Burning Man, and you're just trying to learn how to integrate your experience. And we actually noticed a lot of the people that were showing up to the class were professionals. So I started seeing these two conversations, the experiencers that just wanted maybe some peer support, and then the professionals that wanted to have these other conversations. And so, me being a professional and entering to that space, it just kind of made sense to make that offering of going what do we need in this space? Where is the place that we can have this conversation and have these resources available? So, we started to make that pivot towards professionals back in 2019.
And I've actually had a few clients go through the course and say amazing things. So
awesome. Nice.
I've heard nothing but great news about it. But, because you've been doing the education with this course, and then I know you have others, and you guys have really become a prominent voice out there in the psychedelic space. I'm curious, what have you noticed change in the last, year to year and a half since it's now been on the front page of, every major media outlet there is? The laws are changing probably very quickly, or what I think is very quick. And then just kind of this frenzy of like, oh, here's psychedelics and I want to get involved. And I mean, because even I've noticed this just with the work I do is, there are so many people that want to start facilitating or doing one-on-ones or integrating it into their coaching or healing or therapy or, whatever it is. What is the trend that you've noticed? And I do also want to talk about like the dark side of this as well.
One of my favorite topics.
Yeah, I know, right?
Oh man, the trends. It's been really interesting, I guess, like, being interested in this. I think my interest, I guess, in consciousness and just this area really kind of started around like 2007. And really, it was still a little taboo. I mean, I think Hopkins started their research at that point, but it wasn't really out there. Like when I was doing a lot of this stuff, I didn't know who to talk to. I was really kind of alone in it and thinking like, like where do I turn? Luckily, there's a lot of books available, like Stan Grof and Ram Dass and all those folks, and those felt like my mentors. Just being able to dig into that and feel like, oh, okay, people have been here before. And so it's the trends, I guess, lately are just more and more people are starting to get interested. I guess you could look at it from different perspectives, like the consumer end. I mean, just more and more people are interested in like the microdosing. I'm always so surprised by like, people that I would never suspect to be interested in this, and they're like, hey, have you heard about this microdosing thing? And it's funny for like people that don't know who I am, like I'll just strike up a casual conversation with somebody like, have you heard of microdosing? Yeah, and I'm like, what the hell? And so it's been interesting to see the people starting to become more open towards these taboo subjects and substances, and so that's changing. And then, I mean, things really started to change in 2019 with like Denver decriminalizing psilocybin, and then the initiatives taking off nationwide in various. I mean, there's 3 towns in Massachusetts, and then
there's a new
two
one
in California. Ann Arbor, Michigan. I mean, and with Oregon completely legalizing psilocybin therapy, not legalizing your own use, but legalizing it within the terms of therapy. Yeah, and then you also have like the business interest. So a lot of capital coming in, a lot of people making their transition from cannabis to psychedelics, maybe thinking it's cannabis 2.0. And yeah, so just a lot of investor money starting to come into this space. And
which, by
so
the
that's
way,
exciting.
everybody I talk to is nervous about. They're like, oh my God, and I'm like, well, let's see. It's, double-edged sword here.
Yeah. And then, I guess then on the professional end, like therapists and professionals are starting to open up to the idea around this, because there haven't been too many great advancements in like, pharmacological interventions in psychiatry. And so that's exciting to a lot of medical professionals. And then therapists, maybe the uptick trend of, somebody's coming in talking about they want to microdose, that they want to take mushrooms, and I don't even really know anything about this, right? So yeah, I think we're just in an upward trend within this area. A lot more interest is developing. The stigma, I think, is starting to dissolve. It's still there. I mean, we still have a long way to go to some degree, but I think it's starting to enter into the mainstream more. I mean, you're seeing them on mainstream news outlets almost daily to some degree, or weekly or monthly, depending on what you're looking at.
Now I'm curious. So yeah, thanks for sharing all this. It's been interesting to watch, and it'll be interesting to see what happens. And yes, there are the people that are concerned about the venture capital and the money and the patents and whoever accessibility is a huge issue. But I'm curious about the people that come to all of your courses or what you've seen out there, because like I said, I've even noticed this kind of people feeling like they have the call to facilitate one-on-one sessions, and and I keep trying to maintain a very non-judgment, neutral place in saying,
Yeah.
like, who's to say what's good or bad? Who's to say what worked for you and not for the other? But what have you seen, like, our potential, like, dark sides of people coming in and wanting to facilitate, or even, getting involved in some of the more complex substances? Like, to me, psilocybin, okay, yeah, it's relatively safe, minus all the trauma that could be re-traumatized in a session. But when what we've seen with people like jumping into DMT or even ayahuasca or
5-MeO.
yeah, like things that are even potentially like physically dangerous. Do you see this a lot? Like, do you see this kind of like new facilitators who've maybe worked with psychedelics for 2 years, and then they're like, now I'm called to be distributing this to all my neighbors? Is this something that is really actually happening, and to watch out for?
I think a lot of people do get the call when they start engaging in medicine, and they see how powerful it is, right? And they go, I want to share this with everybody. This is like one thing we even say in like breathwork sessions is like, as much insight that you have, stick with your experience. Don't run to the nearest like news, the telephone to call the news station to tell them that like you figured out the cure to whatever that is.
And then also, do this.
Yeah. And so I think that is inherent sometimes to the psychedelic experience when we don't live in a culture that really provides a framework for these experiences. And just, I guess I would say, just experiences with holotropic states of consciousness in general. And so when we get exposure to it and we have an experience, we go, oh my God, everybody needs to experience this. I think that's where the risk comes in. And, what does it feel like to sit with that for a little bit, especially if you are listening and you do get that call? What does it feel like to sit with that and not rush into the work? What does it feel like to take a slow, gradual approach to it? And yeah, I don't think like that judgment of like, oh, you shouldn't do this work, or, oh, who are you to just rush into this? Because we all get the call to some degree, right? And I think some people are quicker to act than others. Like for myself, like, I'm pretty slow to answering the call. I get it. It's like, oh, here, go do this. And I'm like, I don't know.
Yeah, that's how I am. It usually takes like years.
Yeah. For example, like, when I tell people like the breathwork training is around 2 years, people want to facilitate after a weekend. And maybe this is just part of our culture where you can take, weekend classes and start like offering things. But I didn't offer my first breathwork workshop until maybe like 4 years after training. And there's a lot of complexities that come up in sessions. And, I think just being able to really sit with all the nuances and really getting a lot of exposure to different types of experiences that come up with you. So doing your own work and really understanding yourself, and then being in a place where you can sit with other people and noticing, all the the transpersonal stuff that comes up, the transference stuff that comes up, the countertransference. And so, when we look at like, say, like shamanism, and like somebody that's stepping into that role, it's decades of work and training. Right. You might start your apprenticeship, but it's going to take years and years and years to really understand that before you kind of like really step into it. And maybe it's just, a product of our culture that we want things quick. We want things now, and we don't.
The Amazon.com effect.
Yeah. We don't really
Prime.
appreciate the rigor of maybe jumping into a lot of this stuff and studying it and being slow and really following our own process. But again, there are some people that get the call and they jump into it, and maybe they already have the skill set. They've been like sitting on it for a while, and they're like, okay, this is like the next thing to do. And they are very gifted healers. On the shadow side, you get a lot of people that step into this work that end up causing a lot of harm. They don't know what they're doing. They don't know how to maybe contain certain situations. We do get a lot of like just feedback from people that email us either in need of help or just disclosing their experiences with like certain like underground guides, and even just like clients that I've worked with, people just disclosing very difficult and challenging experiences that they had with like guides or sitters, like maybe not like, also doing very inappropriate things with boundaries and whatnot. And so, that's the shadow side of maybe rushing into it and not really kind of getting your skill set in tune before actually doing a lot of this work.
Yeah.
And something else that that Joe and I talk about, and something I've thought about pretty often with the research, really, like what happens like when Compass gets approved for like psilocybin therapy, and in their training it doesn't seem like they're giving anybody any sort of experience, and they're probably going to be training a lot of guides that maybe they do have experience in their own underground sessions, but it doesn't. I remember hearing George Goldsmith talk at Horizon saying like, we're thinking about scalability and we just need to get a lot of therapists trained. And to some degree, to scale what they're trying to do, he's got a point. You just need to get people trained. And it comes back to that question of, do you need a psychedelic experience to really understand how to sit with people? And, the researchers and scientists and therapists will go back and forth between, what's right there. Sometimes people say, do you need to be do you need to have something wrong with your heart or have cancer to do heart surgery or treat an illness? So do you have to have a psychedelic experience to understand how to sit with people in psychedelics? But the one thing that I think about as this scales, does the society or culture have the framework for understanding how to really integrate these very powerful experiences? And what happens when you create a more kind of capitalistic model of mental health where you just need to get people in and out, providing the experience without the preparation, without the community integration, and without the framework for people to really kind of like be held in that? And what happens when it becomes more of a kind of factory thing, in, out, in, out, in, out?
Yes.
And
this is actually like, this is exactly what I wanted to ask you next about, is this like, because this is kind of the future I see. To me, it's like already existing in my reality, just the amount of people that are either self-medicating or medicating 101, or, there's still circles happening all over the planet. But what about the day-to-day, the integration, the before, the after, the preparation? Like, it's like even someone like me who's had a lifetime of experience, like I'm still doing constant integration work. Like,
oh, yeah.
Constant. Like every person I work with pretty much understands or at least works with psychedelics and also is like a somatic therapist or a healer or, have breath work, Reiki, like all of the above. So yeah, let's keep talking about this, because there are a lot of people who want to go into some sort of like an integration type business, whether it is somatics or movement or breath work, or like a lot of my clients have very much like you've studied multiple things, but now it's like it's such a new, I love saying the word new, it's such a new concept to have integration or turn to someone for help, especially when a lot of people do psychedelics, they feel great after, and they think, oh, I'm good, I don't need help. But yeah, let's talk about this framework that you were mentioning, our society.
Yeah. Well, this is something that, so I guess to finish that thought, so large scale, like, and one thing that I kept coming back to is like, are you able to hold a container for possible spiritual emergence? And like, when you open people up to these states, what's the ripple effect? And are you going to see maybe people have more quote unquote spiritual emergencies or just, very open experiences? And so I come back to this through my near death experience. I had this very powerful experience that unfolded that made me confront death. And I came back and just viewing life completely different. And it was very hard to, I'm still integrating it. It's going to be a lifelong process. But I kept coming back and saying, like, it doesn't feel like the culture really understands this. I remember when I was really struggling in high school, one of the, I just completely kind of gave up on high school, because at one point I was like, you guys are just factory producing kids, and I just think there's better ways of learning here.
Totally.
And I sometimes would get in trouble, but I remember the principal said, you should just be thankful that you're alive. And at that point, she has a point, but at that point I was thinking, I don't think you understand like what I just went through and the psycho-spiritual aspect here. So just telling me that I should be thankful, there's a part of me that doesn't want to have anything to do with any of this.
Yeah.
Because I had an experience where I kind of accepted my fate, and I felt like I was going home, and for actually me to be here is really hard.
Yeah. And
so I think as a culture, just really kind of, how do we create containers for these very exceptional experiences? And I think that is confronting death. And I think that is really where our culture struggles, is confronting impermanence. Just even thinking about the medical system, like we just keep prolonging life because there's uncomfortable feelings of, death, right?
Or like, or even like COVID. I keep saying COVID is like, to me, I'm like, don't people see this right in front of their eyes? This really had us look at death differently, at least, me and everybody I know. But I'm like, isn't this going to start changing the discussion around life and death and how we choose and how we see it? But go on. This is.
Well, I mean, it will be interesting, because I think COVID is a really interesting thing that happened to us, because when in human history has like the entire world been exposed to this one thing and shut down at the same time? I'm thinking about like other pandemics, like it probably took a while for everybody to realize you're on the same page, and you didn't have this interconnectedness that we do now, where, people are trying to work together a little bit more because you saw what was happening in other countries, the instant communication, and everybody got put on pause, right? And then you noticed all the kind of like, kinks in the chains. You go, oh, wait, supply chains, this and that. Like, what happens like when everything starts to stop? And, we started to notice things. But yeah, what is this like sense of wanting to go back to normal? And this is something like we've brought up on the podcast before. It's like, what are some of the things that you've really taken away from COVID? The slowing down, like, say like restaurants closing the streets down and having more open street dining and more kind of community engagement and this and that. It's like, does that all go away because we want to kind of go back to normal, go back to the hustle bustle of like a capitalistic society? And, but to some degree, it's like, I guess people saw, really devastating like economic disaster for a lot of people that lost jobs and this and that. So I get the need to want to go back to normal, but can we reimagine or just like envision a new normal where it's not just so chaotic? And can we really kind of appreciate maybe some of the things that we learned? Like, what does it feel like to slow down a little bit or be a little bit more kind of community oriented? Just the amount of people that got into gardening, at least around my area, last year, you couldn't find anything, right? Which was really interesting.
Exactly. But, I wonder, it's interesting. I have a few clients who have studied with death doulas, this whole death doula training program, and their dream is to integrate psilocybin into end of life care. And then also, I keep saying like, well, what about just people who want to start exploring death? Like I do think there's actually a need for more discussion and conversation around it. But is this something that you feel like is going to change with the use of psychedelics? Like I know personally, psychedelics have helped me more than anything to sit in the discomfort of like life, the last few years, especially COVID, or, like you mentioned, the discomfort of impermanence or the acceptance of death. To me, that's been one of the biggest gifts of working with all these psychedelics and medicines, because you have these ego deaths over and over and over, and then you also experience that. You get to see it. You get to see, maybe not everybody, but the nature of reality. And you do have that feeling of, okay, like the going home that makes you not fear death so much, and also not fear life, meaning like live it, just live it. Because it is impermanent, and we don't know when it's going to end. Do you think this is going to be like, the psychedelics and death conversation is going to have more traction over the next few years? It's such a kind of a new, it's still this new taboo industry, you know?
I think so, but it's like interesting when you look at like the old research and where the research started again, of like just thinking about like what was going on in like Spring Grove down in Maryland, just treating, you know, terminal illness with psychedelics, and then, you know, it kind of started back up at Johns Hopkins with that. But that was the one thing that really kind of got me interested in this, was with the psilocybin experience when I was 18 or 19. It felt so similar to dying. And that's what kind of just like freaked me out, was like, how could I ingest something from the earth that produced this like near death like experience? And, you know, to some degree, that's me exploring my narrative of dying. So I get why that near death experience kind of came up, but it just felt very similar. And it was so eerie, where I just became so fascinated by it. And after my near death experience, I just said, what if everybody understood the potential here of that, if they were able to tap into that death experience and understand that there's so much more to life than the mundane that we get caught up in, and just be able to see the magic that's unfolding all the time. And when I came across psilocybin, I said, oh shit, here's something that could possibly mediate this for a lot of people without having to go through, you know, something very traumatic. But when you start to look at, like, say, rites of passages, I mean, rites of passages were very intense, and it was to kind of help foster a psycho-spiritual death and rebirth experience, but it also helped to pass wisdom down, to almost get you more familiar with your culture's narrative and mythology, right? It's like those archetypal forces and narratives start to become real, right? You start to live them out. So I think there is huge potential for psychedelics in the death realm. And I mean, one of our earliest podcasts was with Dr. Catherine McLean, who's at Hopkins. And I mean, that was something that she said too. It's like, you know, why do you need to wait until you're at the end of your life to have an experience to help you develop a relationship with death? We have no idea. I was 16. I remember when I was laying in the first aid station and they said, your vitals are fine. You know, or no, they're like, your ribs are fine. There's no bruising, but your vitals are very low and your pulse is really low. We think you have internal injuries. And the first thing I thought was, oh shit, I'm going to die tonight. And I started to pray. God. I said, I do not want to die, you know? And it's like, I could not be here right now if those folks didn't like act on it so quickly. So it's like, I think that taught me that, like, you have no idea when your time's going to come. And to be able to have experiences that help us to develop a relationship with our life, I think is really important. And it comes back to like this saying that I picked up in this death and dying class I took during my undergrad, but it's how we live our life is how we prepare for death, and how we prepare for death is how we live our life. And so if death is always on your shoulder, which death is always on my shoulder, and it's kind of a bittersweet curse in some sense, because it makes me stubborn at times and I don't always like to do things, and I'm like, I could die any moment. Like, I'm going to do what I want to do. And so it to some degree, it makes I have a hard time conforming to certain things, because that's always kind of chipping away at me. I'm like, how do I want to spend my time here? Because time's very precious. Yeah. And it's the only thing that we have. And I wouldn't say that like psychedelics and the near-death experience completely resolved my fear of death. To some degree, there's like this sense of, I know kind of what that process is like, and I'm not so much afraid of that. There's now this like weird fear of time. There's so much stuff I want to do, and there's so much stuff I want to experience. And how do I try to embrace all that? And so I think I'm more aware of my time here on Earth, and thinking, how do I want to spend my time here? And that's a really powerful meditation to sit with every day. You know, when things aren't working or things aren't aligning, you go, do I really want to spend more time dealing with this? No, like, you know, there's such a limited time here on Earth.
Exactly. And to me, this has been like, you know, I keep saying, I'm like, doesn't everybody see this last year and whatever it's been now, year and a few months with COVID right in front of our face? And having that idea of like impermanency and like death could, happen in an instant, which pre-COVID, post-COVID, death could always happen in an instant. It doesn't really matter. But now it's like so in our face. I'm like, don't people see that, we only live once in this incarnation. Life is limited. And why live on someone else's terms? You should be doing whatever it is you want to do. I mean, obviously to a point, there's certain societal rules that we have to kind of work with. But this has caused a lot of my clients to come to me, where they had these kind of awakenings of, you know what, my job isn't as secure as I thought it was. I never liked it. And now this is just kind of throwing everything up in my face. Let me go do what I really want to be doing especially for your work. Work takes up a lot of our time at least in our Western society or most of the society. And, to me, it is important to really enjoy what you're doing for the most part. I don't enjoy paying taxes, but I enjoy everything else that I do in my business. So this has come up a lot. And I think, this will be, to me, a very important conversation as people work with psychedelics more and more, even in a therapeutic setting, is there's going to be a lot of this like, well, maybe that underlying depression you have, was also partially due to your, misaligned job or your misaligned lifestyle or misaligned place that you're living. I mean, we could go on and on. And this is where like the integration comes in. And also, I wanted to ask you a little bit, I know we only have a few more minutes, but about, weaving in the somatic work into integration, because I personally, I'm a very big proponent of this. I have worked with somatic therapists for many, many years as kind of my psychedelic integration, because to me, psychedelic integration is every day, every moment. And I'm currently in kind of a non-psychedelic integration training program, because she doesn't call it that, but it's learning somatic, different somatic techniques within kind of the psychedelic realm as well. But I'm curious, how do you feel that the somatic work and embodiment work plays a part in psychedelic integration? Is this something you see as also going to be as important as, breath work or daily practice or working with a therapist or some kind of, integrator? Yeah, what would you say about this?
I think so. And I think I would just even ask you, like, how do you view integration? Like, what is your integration process?
Yeah, and that's interesting because, a lot of people don't, what I've been experiencing out there, people haven't really fully understood what integration even is. And I guess we're all still defining that, and everybody has to define what works best for them and their bodies and their psyche. But, I know from my own personal experience, I was on the medicine path for a very, very long time. And I was doing daily meditation, part of a Buddhist Sangha, going to therapy. But the missing piece was the body. Mm-hmm. And that's what made the big difference. But how do you guys as psychedelics today within your programs, like how do you define what integration really is even?
Yeah, I always come back to, well, it's a very individual kind of path, right? I think everybody makes their own meaning out of these experiences in different ways. So I really like the word holotropic. Again, a term that Stan Grof coined, and he kind of was playing around with the term heliotropic, which describes the movement of a plant or tree as it grows in the direction of the sun. And so holotropic means moving towards wholeness. And so what does wholeness mean to you? And how do you move towards that? And for me, integration, I'll use the word psyche as this thing that is trying to move towards wholeness. And I really like kind of like James Hillman's description of psyche. Again, going back to psyche, I think from our perspective, we always think of psyche as mind, and then I go back to like kind of like the Greek translation of that, which is like, well, mind, but soul. Like psyche is soul. And James Hillman kind of describes the soul, not so much as like the spirit, but this life energy that really flows through us. So I think we all feel that, right? There's something that bubbles up inside of us that wants to speak, that wants to express, that wants to be heard, that wants to be seen, wants to create. It's that life energy that is just flowing through us. And where does it want to move, What does it want to move towards? And how do you start to listen to that and start to move towards whatever that is, whatever that song is, right, that wants to be sung. And so that's the way I kind of approach integration, is more of this metaphorical aspect. But there are practical aspects here that I approach as well. But I think at the core of it, I use the metaphor of the seed and the flower. So bringing your insight back, bringing that seed back, planting in the ground, and really tending to it. Tending to that garden, weeding, tilling the soil, and really taking care of that plant. And as it grows towards the sun, being able to then hopefully give back to the world in some sense, right? Like give your fruits back to the world. Let the community really enjoy that as well. So on the metaphorical side, that's how I really kind of approach integration. Like, what are you doing here on Earth? And, this is more of like my philosophical kind of existential thing. I think that came from like my death experience, where it's like, what am I doing here? I mean, it's pretty weird when you think about it, that you wake up in this body every day and like nobody really tells us what we're doing here. We're just kind of,
especially now. I mean, like, why are we here at this time in human history? It's like, oh my God, it's such a gift and a mindfuck at the same time.
I mean, yeah, I think like, I don't know. I think like since I've had that experience with death, for me, life is the trip. I mean, for me, this is the weirdest thing that we'll ever experience to some degree. And how do you really embody that? And I think, there's times in some of those psychedelic experiences I had, I was so out of my body because I wanted to go back to that numinous womb-like experience. And I would, look at my body and being like, whoa, this is a thing that we have. Yeah. And so it's really interesting that I went from the transpersonal realm of really exploring these like, deep transpersonal realms with psychedelics and holotropic breathwork and, shamanism and just exploring my psyche, to then feeling very unstable and disconnected from my body, and also disconnected because I had a lot of physical trauma that I was working through, and then coming from the somatic lens and being like, wait, no, I need to come back here to the body and really embrace all this. How do I see this here now and really try to enjoy each and every moment. And, it's tough, because there is a lot of suffering that goes on. There's a lot of like, just bullshit in the world. And, it doesn't mean that I'm enlightened and I know what I'm doing. Like, I definitely have a lot of down days because I think of seeing these bigger pictures and feeling like, wait, where's the community that can really support this? And where's like the society that can really see this? And I think that loneliness sometimes creeps in when you do try to just appreciate being here and everything else is very chaotic and you go, ugh, this feels like a lonely thing. But yeah, I sometimes will think like everybody's so focused on transcendence and I'm really focused on just trying to be here in the body.
It's like the opposite, right? Yeah, no, this is, I love your analogy about the seeds. And yeah, I mean, it's going to be a very complicated time. I mean, because even for me, I've been through the ups and downs of life. I've had, multiple, maybe not as strong as you, but I've had some near-death experiences that have been very jarring, like to the point where I wanted to leave it all, it's complicated to be here. But I think
it is very complicated.
I mean, especially, my God, like, I don't think things are going to get any easier either, maybe eventually, but the next few years are definitely going to be a roller coaster of a ride. And I do believe that, the psychedelics, it's, the one gift that to me they do have in it is to be able to, come back and be in your body and understand, like, what is this all about, and live with more purpose. And like you said, like, have those seeds where you can tend to it and then, bring, I believe like everybody's here to shine their own light. It's like, what is your unique medicine for the world? And that's, like, to me, that's why the subtitle of this podcast is Medicine for These Times. Because I keep saying to my clients, I'm like, you are the medicine. Like, each one of us has something, some little medicine. And I do believe more and more people are going to need it, as it's been so hard to navigate, and it's, harder to navigate every day, but
Oh my God, yeah, it's hectic.
oh my God. Just like you, it's so weird. I have these I've been having this for many years, and I don't, I always find it kind of funny, but I have these middle of the night like existential moments where I wake up in the middle of the night in a lucid state and just like I'm like, "Oh my God, I'm a human." It's so weird. And then I fall back to sleep. Or I'm like, what am I doing here? Like, and it's just interesting. And I'm like, well, it's so exciting, but damn, it sucks so much. It's just like,
Yeah.
but this is why I'm so glad you guys are teaching such wonderful things at Psychedelics today. Now I'm curious, what do you guys have upcoming for, the next few months or this year through Psychedelics today? I know you have classes and you're expanding, and tell us more about where, what people can sign up for and get into this year.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. psychedeliceducationcenter.com. You could learn more there. We have a bunch of courses up there, but our main course is the Navigating Psychedelics for Clinicians and Therapists course. We run 2 groups every 8 weeks or so. We usually take a week off or 2 weeks off in between groups. And I think we have the groups up until November. So we have those dates up until November. So we have I don't know when this is going to be released, but the next group is May 20th. So that's next week of the time we're recording this. So if this gets pushed out, in the future, I think the next opening is in July. And so this is an 8-week course. It's like a hybrid course. You get access to a bunch of pre-recorded material. The Navigating Psychedelics lessons on self-care and integration part, and then we had some add-on interviews and presentations specifically for clinicians and therapists. And then so we meet online for an hour and a half to really talk about the topics there and to dig into it. And so I'll do some presentation as well. And we really take like a transpersonal somatic approach to this. We really incorporate our background, Joe's background in philosophy, our background in the breathwork training, a lot of Grofian, kind of approach to things, my shamanic approach. So it's definitely kind of like an integrative type of way of approaching this work. And trying to understand it also through that clinical model. Sometimes the clinical stuff gets a little dry, so we need to, explore some of the transpersonal, where I think it's really important, because I think some of the drier research and clinical stuff, here's my bias coming out, aren't always necessarily addressing some of these deeper transpersonal issues that I've personally been through. And, also working with clients that, report this stuff too. And it's like, okay, if this has happened to me, if this is happening to other people, we need to also address it and, explore it. So we're not afraid of getting transpersonally weird at times, which I think is important. That's the
reality of what happens. Yeah,
it's definitely important. We had one person say they came in there and our course just really shook their traditional foundation to the core, and they felt like they were in somewhat of an existential crisis afterwards. I think that's a good thing.
Yeah, right? I know. That sounds great.
Psychedelics are disruptors. Yeah. I mean, they're disrupting technologies. And I think psychedelics are really kind of disrupting the way that we view mental health and the way that we approach health and healing and wellness in general. Yeah. And to some degree, I think we need a new framework. Being traditionally trained, I think there's some limitations there as this stuff moves forward. For example, we get into the nuances of psychosis and spiritual emergence. Okay. And how do we bring more of some of this transpersonal language in to maybe explore that? But that's a fine line. I mean, I worked in a place where I saw the benefit of mainstream psychiatry, but also saw the benefit of also trying to push the narrative and giving autonomy back to the person and bringing a more humanistic approach to this. So Yeah, that's one of our main offerings is the Navigating Psychedelics for Clinicians and Therapists course. But we also have some other great courses up there that you can take at any point. We have Psychedelics in the Shadow, so exploring the shadow side of psychedelia. I think we have like 6 or 7 interviews in that series. So that's why I said that's one of my favorite topics is exploring the shadow. And then we also have a course on Jung and psychedelics that was presented by Johanna Hille and a few others up there. So that's at psychedelicEducationCenter.com. So if you want to check that out. And then on the other Psychedelics Today side, we're just going to continue pushing out our podcasts. We put out 2 shows a week at this point.
Wow.
And then really kind of updating our blog and getting into more events and hopefully breathwork in the future once things start to open back up. So
I know, please. I know I've been looking for in person, but it's not not happening yet. I'm like outdoors. Kyle, you can come lead it up here.
Yeah. I've done outdoor breathwork.
I know,
before.
like outdoors would be great. Well, thank you so much, Kyle. We'll have all your links in the show notes and on the website, and I think even a coupon code for any of your courses that I think we have.
Yeah.
And yeah, awesome, Kyle. It was so good to talk to you. We'll have to bring you back because I could talk to you for hours.
Yeah, I love talking with you, Beth. Thank you.
I know, I love talking about the shadows too.
Yeah, it's important.
I know. No, I actually, I think it was Cherie I was interviewing, or someone recently, where I had someone actually ask me, I want to go into psychedelic therapy or facilitation. Do I need to confront my shadows? She actually asked me this, and I was like, I'm not one to answer, but yes. Like,
well, it's like an interesting
have no
question,
choice, actually.
Right? Yeah, it's like, do you need to? Maybe not. If it comes up, it's something you're gonna have to deal with.
It will,
right?
and I'm like, I'm pretty sure it'll come up. If you don't have any shadows, you're doing like pretty deep bypassing, and the way the universe works, at least from my experience, is the shadows will find you somehow. So
they creep in eventually.
Exactly. Thank you so much, Kyle.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it.
Great to have you here.